The Young and the Restless spoilers, full episodes Wednesday, update the 18th of March 2026. When Diane Jenkins Abbott entered the room, she was unprepared for what she would see. The image was instantly etched in her mind. Jack Abbott lying unconscious beside Patty Williams, a scene so distorted, misleading, and cruel that no explanation could immediately erase it. The sound shattered, the silence driven not only by jealousy, but also by fear, betrayal, and the unbearable weight of everything that had gone wrong. For Diane, this wasn't just about what she saw, it was about everything she had tried to preserve. Her marriage had been tested countless times, her faith shaken by secrets, by outside interference, by the ever-present shadow of Victor's manipulative schemes. Jack awoke in a state of disorientation, still reeling from what Patty had done to him. His mind struggled to catch up with reality, his body heavy, his thoughts jumbled. But the moment he saw Diane's face, he understood what it looked like. And worse, he understood that no simple explanation would suffice. His own voice was weak in the face of the impending storm. He insisted that things had spiraled out of control, that he had never chosen this, that Patty had manipulated the whole situation. His words were urgent, almost desperate, because he knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about clearing up a misunderstanding. This was about saving what remained of their marriage, about convincing Diane that the man she trusted hadn't betrayed her in the most humiliating way. But trust once shaken is not easily restored, especially in a city like Genoa City where deception is almost a language of its own. Diane stood there torn between what she saw and what she wanted to believe. The truth seemed slippery, unstable, and elusive in such an emotionally charged moment, and deep beneath the rage lay a greater fear that this might be the final crack she could never mend. Throughout the city, the ripple effects had begun. Nikki Newman sensed the consequences even before the truth was revealed. She had lived long enough alongside Victor Newman to recognize the warning signs. Each time Victor went too far, each time he blurred the line between strategy and ruthlessness, it left wounds that ultimately returned to haunt not only his enemies, but his family as well. And this time Nikki feared that the final wound might reach her in a way she could not ignore. The tension in their marriage had been simmering at first, subtle, then intensifying with each new revelation. Victor's refusal to acknowledge the consequences of his actions, his cold indifference to Jack's pain, his possible connection to Patty's behavior, all of this created a pressure Nikki could no longer pretend to ignore. She knew what Victor was capable of. She had witnessed it too many times, and the most terrifying part wasn't whether he would cross the line again, but whether he believed he had. Because if Victor truly thought all of this was justified, what did that say about the future of their marriage? While Nikki grappled with that fear, another storm was brewing, one that could tear apart both the Newman and Abbott families at once. Summer Newman could no longer remain silent. The truth she had kept hidden for so long, the wounds she had buried, the connections she was beginning to uncover, they were too heavy to conceal any longer. When summer approached, it wasn't with hesitation, but with a powerful clarity that surprised everyone around her. She was no longer the one trying to protect the fragile balance between the families. She was no longer willing to shield Victor from the consequences of her actions or allow Patty to hide behind her instability. She spoke with a strength born of pain, of betrayal, of finally deciding that truth mattered more than loyalty. She exposed Patty for who she truly was, not just a deranged woman acting on obsession, but someone who had inflicted real harm, who had terrorized her, who had crossed unforgivable boundaries. Then she turned her attention to Victor. The room seemed to change the moment his name was mentioned. Summer didn't soften her tone. She didn't hesitate. She presented everything she knew, everything she had heard. The sprawling estate of the Newman Ranch had always been a fortress, a towering monument of power and invincibility built by the ruthless hands of Victor Newman. But tonight, to Nikki Newman, the grand walls felt like the suffocating confines of a gilded cage. She stood rigid by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main living room, her piercing blue eyes fixed on the darkness of the Wisconsin night. She saw none of the manicured grounds or the distant twinkling lights of Genoa City. Instead, her mind was a chaotic, churning storm of betrayal, fear, and a profound, aching exhaustion. The heavy crystal glass in her hand trembled slightly, the amber liquid of her club soda catching the dim, flickering light of the massive stone fireplace. Her marriage to Victor, a legendary union that had weathered decades of storms, bitter divorces, infidelities, and corporate wars, was now standing on the precipice of total annihilation. Victor had crossed a line that even Nikki, with her historically bottomless well of forgiveness for the man she loved, could not justify or ignore. The sickening revelation that he was the grand architect behind Jack Abbott's abduction, that he had callously orchestrated placing Jack on a remote luxury yacht with the deeply unstable Patty Williams, was a level of psychological cruelty that made Nikki's blood run cold. She had screamed at him, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the ranch, demanding answers, demanding a shred of humanity. But Victor had only offered that infuriatingly calm, dismissive smirk, his pride swelling in the wake of his own malicious genius. He had treated Jack's life, his sanity, and his sobriety as mere pawns in his endless toxic vendetta against the Abbott family. Nikki squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear escaping to trace a warm path down her cheek. She was married to a monster who viewed human suffering as a legitimate business tactic, and the realization was tearing her soul apart. Miles away across the sprawling expanse of the city, the atmosphere inside the Grand Abbott mansion was equally fraught, heavy with the suffocating weight of shattered trust and boiling rage. Diane Jenkins Abbott paced the length of the opulent living room like a caged panther. Her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. Her hands clenched into fists so tight, her perfectly manicured nails bit painfully into her palms. Her right hand still tingled with the phantom sting of the vicious slap she had delivered to Jack's face earlier that day. The image was seared into her retinas, a waking nightmare she could not blink away. Jack, her husband, the man she had fought so bitterly to reclaim and protect, lying in a tangled bed aboard that floating prison with Patty Williams. Diane knew the intellectual truth of the situation. She knew Jack had been heavily drugged, stripped of his faculties, his judgment, and his physical will by a woman whose obsession knew no bounds. But the visceral, gut-wrenching pain of seeing them together was a corrosive poison coursing through her veins. Yet as the initial shockwave of betrayal and heartbreak began to recede, a hotter, more deeply focused fury took its place. Jack's weakness in that cabin was merely a symptom. The deadly disease was Victor Newman. Victor had built the trap. Victor had baited the hook, with Patty knowing exactly how to inflict maximum psychological devastation on Jack and by extension Diane. Diane stopped pacing, staring at the flickering flames in her own hearth. Victor's ruthless machinations had brought her marriage to the absolute brink of collapse, threatening to destroy the fragile peace and happiness she had clawed her way back from the grave to achieve. A dark, venomous hatred for the Newman patriarch solidified in her chest, hardening into a diamond of pure resolve. Back at the ranch, Nikki set her glass down on the mahogany side table with a sharp, decisive clink that echoed in the cavernous room. She could not stay here. She could not breathe the same air as the man who was actively destroying the lives of people she cared for. Jack had been her sponsor, her confidant, her savior in her darkest hours of addiction. To watch him be systematically dismantled by her own husband was a complicity she absolutely refused to bear. But Nikki, a seasoned veteran of the Newman Wars, knew that fighting Victor from within the walls of the ranch was a losing battle. He controlled the narrative here. He monitored the staff, the security, and anticipated her every emotional outburst. If she was going to stop him, she needed to step completely outside his blast radius. She needed an ally who possessed an equal, if not greater, stake in seeing Victor's current empire of lies crumble. Her mind immediately snapped to the one person who would be feeling the exact same cocktail of rage and desperation tonight, Diane. The very thought of seeking out Diane Jenkins made Nikki's stomach churn with revulsion. Their history was a bloody tapestry woven with decades of bitter rivalry, vicious insults, corporate sabotage, and physical altercations. They were oil and water, two matriarchs who had spent a lifetime fighting for dominance in the social and corporate hierarchies of Genoa City. But this was no longer about social standing, charity galas, or petty jealousies. This was about survival. Nikki marched to the foyer, grabbing her heavy cashmere coat from the rack. She didn't care about the optics, and she certainly wasn't going to offer the woman a shoulder to cry on. She was going to forge a weapon. "Prepare the car," she ordered the estate staff, her voice stripped of all emotion. "I'm going to the Abbott estate." The heavy oak doors of the Abbott mansion swung open to reveal a startled Mrs. Martinez, who barely had time to announce the late-night visitor before Nikki swept into the foyer, a vision of cold, aristocratic determination. Diane emerged from the living room, her tear-stained face instantly hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated hostility at the sight of the Newman matriarch. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" Diane's voice was a low, dangerous hiss echoing in the cavernous entryway. "Did Victor send you to gloat, to see the wreckage of his handiwork firsthand?" Nikki didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, invading Diane's space. "Don't flatter yourself, Diane. I am not here as Victor's emissary, and I certainly didn't brave the freezing cold to revel in your misery." Diane crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing into hostile slits. "Then why are you here, Nikki? Come to offer your profound apologies for the monster you sleep next to, because you can take your apologies and walk right back out that door. Your husband orchestrated the kidnapping of my husband. He handed Jack over to a psychotic woman who drugged and assaulted him. You are complicit just by wearing his ring." The accusation struck a raw nerve, but Nikki held her ground, her posture rigidly defiant. "I am well aware of what Victor has done." Nikki fired back, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and suppressed grief. "Do you think I am happy about this? Do you think I condone it? My marriage is collapsing around my ears because of his ruthless God-complex games. I am just as much a victim of his tyranny right now as you are. You have no idea what it was like." Diane spat, stepping closer, the scent of her expensive perfume mixing with the bitter tension in the air, walking onto that yacht, finding him like that. Victor engineered a nightmare. The air between them crackled with decades of toxic history, an invisible electric field of unspoken grievances and past wars. They stood mere feet apart, two women who had spent their lives defining themselves in opposition to one another. But as Diane stared into Nikki's eyes, she didn't see the smug, untouchable Newman queen. She saw a woman who was exhausted, terrified, and pushed to the absolute limit. Nikki took a slow, steadying breath, raising a gloved hand in a gesture of truce. "I am not here to fight you, Diane. We have wasted enough of our lives doing that. I am here because I need an ally. And whether you want to admit it or not, standing in the ruins of your living room, you need one too." Diane hesitated, the defensive walls she had erected slowly beginning to crack under the weight of Nikki's undeniable logic. She gestured silently toward the living room, and the two women moved to the plush sofas, taking seats on opposite ends as if maintaining a necessary quarantine. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long dancing shadows across the room, illuminating the stark reality of their shared predicament. "Victor has gone too far this time." Nikki began, her tone shedding its usual arrogance, replaced by a chilling pragmatism. "He has always been ruthless in business, and he has always harbored a deep-seated hatred for Jack. But this psychological warfare, using a deeply disturbed woman like Patty Williams as a weapon, it crosses a boundary that cannot be uncrossed." Diane poured herself a stiff drink from the crystal decanter on the cart, not bothering to offer one to Nikki. "Patty is a loose cannon. She is completely untethered from reality. She genuinely believes she and Jack are destined to be together, that this sick, twisted kidnapping was a romantic reunion. Victor didn't just lock Jack in a room. He threw him into a cage with a starving predator, fully aware of the psychological damage it would inflict." As they spoke, the full, horrifying scope of the manipulation began to crystallize between them. They laid out the pieces of the nightmare. Victor had the endless resources, the dark money, and the cold, calculating intellect to arrange the luxury yacht bribe, the marina workers, and ensure Jack was entirely cut off from the world. Patty, with her delusions and desperate, dangerous obsession, provided the emotional torture. Together, intentionally or not, Victor and Patty had formed a devastating synergy that was actively manipulating the lives of the men they loved. "He wants to break Jack," Diane whispered, the realization settling over her like a heavy, suffocating shroud. "He wants to destroy Jack's spirit, humiliate him publicly and privately, and shatter our marriage in the process. And Patty is the perfect blunt instrument to do it. And he expects me to just stand by and accept it as collateral damage in his endless war." Nikki added, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. "If we do nothing, Diane Victor will succeed. He will destroy Jack, and in doing so, he will destroy whatever soul he has left. He will drag all of us down into the dark with him." Silence descended upon the room, thick and heavy. The reality of their situation demanded a response that neither woman was entirely comfortable with. Diane looked at Nikki, truly looking past the designer clothes, the diamonds, and the Newman bravado. She saw the fierce, protective loyalty that Nikki harbored for her family and, strangely, for Jack. Nikki, in turn, saw the undeniable ferocity in Diane, a lioness willing to tear the world apart to protect her territory and her husband. "We don't have to like each other," Nikki said softly, the words feeling foreign and metallic on her tongue. "God knows we probably never will. But we have a common enemy right now, an enemy who is stronger, richer, and more ruthless than either of us can handle alone." Diane swirled the amber liquid in her glass, her mind racing through the terrifying implications. Teaming up with Nikki Newman was akin to making a deal with the devil's wife. It went against every instinct of self-preservation she had honed over the years. But looking at the shattered state of her husband upstairs and the looming threat of Victor's unchecked power, she knew she had no other choice. "A reluctant alliance," Diane mused aloud, her lips curling into a dark, humorless smile. "If someone had told me a week ago that Nikki Newman would be sitting in my living room plotting against her own husband with me, I would have had them committed to Fairview." "Desperate times call for unprecedented measures," Diane Nikki replied, leaning forward, her eyes locking onto Diane's with intense, unblinking sincerity. "Are you in, or do I walk out that door and leave you to fight Victor Newman by yourself?" Diane set her glass down with a definitive thud. She met Nikki's gaze, her own eyes hardening with a steely resolve that mirrored the woman sitting across from her. "I'm in." The agreement hung in the air, a fragile, highly dangerous pact forged in the fires of mutual desperation. Immediately, the two seasoned tacticians shifted from bitter enemies to co-conspirators. They knew that a direct frontal assault on Victor would be corporate and social suicide. Victor thrived on confrontation. He anticipated every legal and public maneuver. Going to the police was entirely out of the question. Victor had the GCPD in his pocket, and a public investigation would only drag Jack's humiliation through the tabloid mud, giving Victor the ultimate gloating victory. "We need to outmaneuver him in the shadows," Diane stated, pacing again, but this time with calculated purpose. "Our initial plan has to focus on two distinct fronts. First, we have to protect Jack from Patty. She's still out there, and in her twisted mind, she and Jack share a profound bond now. We have to build an impenetrable fortress around him." "I agree." Nikki nodded, her mind already working through the logistics. "You handle the internal security here at the Abbott estate. Beef up the guards, screen every call, keep Jack close, and keep him grounded. Do not let him spiral into the guilt and trauma of what happened on that boat. I will handle the external threat." "And what about Victor?" Diane asked, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "How do we stop a man who thinks he is a god?" "We find the undeniable proof," Nikki declared, her tone icy and resolute. "Victor is meticulous, but he is arrogant. He leaves trails because he believes no one is brave enough or close enough to follow them. I have access to the ranch, to his private home office, to the inner workings of his security logs. I will find the financial records, the encrypted communications with the yacht rental, the logistics of how he transported Patty to that marina. Once we have the proof, what then?" Diane challenged, crossing her arms. "We can't just hand it to the authorities. He'll buy his way out before the ink is dry on the warrant." "No," Nikki agreed, a dangerous glint in her eye. "We hold it over his head. We strip him of his leverage." We expose his plot to the family, to Victoria, to Nick, to the board, to the people whose respect and obedience he craves above all else. We show the world the monster he has become, and we force him to back down. To execute such a dangerous, high-stakes gambit, both women knew they had to establish absolute, unbreakable secrecy. If Victor caught even a whisper that his wife was conspiring with Diane Jenkins, his retaliation would be swift, merciless, and biblical in its proportions. This means we have to put everything else aside, Nikki said, her gaze sweeping over the luxurious room, acknowledging the decades of warfare between the two families. Every petty argument, every past grievance, every slight. We cannot afford distractions. If we are not entirely united in this, Victor will exploit the cracks and tear us both apart. Diane let out a slow, stabilizing breath, nodding in agreement. I can bury the hatchet, Nikki. For Jack's sake and for the sake of my family, I can pretend the last 30 years of our mutual hatred never happened. But we need strict ground rules. No one else can know. Not Billy, not Kyle, and certainly not your children. The circle of trust ends right here in this exact room. Agreed, Nikki said firmly, standing up to cement the deal. We will use burner phones. We will not meet in public, not at society, not at the athletic club. If we need to speak face to face, it will be in neutral, unseen locations. To the rest of Genoa City, we are still bitter, irreconcilable rivals. At the ranch, I will play the part of the furious but ultimately loyal and submissive wife. I will let Victor believe he has weathered my storm, lulling him into a false sense of security. And I will play the devastated, distracted wife, entirely consumed by my marital crisis and my anger at Jack Diane, added a cold, calculating light dancing in her eyes. He will never see us coming. It was a masterclass in deception, a secret cooperation born out of absolute necessity. They were two queens on a chessboard deciding to ignore the rules of the game, to assassinate the king, despite the profound lack of complete trust between them, a lingering, entirely justified paranoia that one might eventually betray the other. They were bound by a shared, undeniable truth. Nikki smoothed the front of her coat, the heavy weight of her treason settling onto her shoulders. She was crossing the Rubicon. By aligning with Diane, she was actively working to dismantle the power of the man she had loved for the better part of her life. But as she looked at Diane, she felt a profound sense of clarity. I'll be in touch, Nikki said, simply turning toward the heavy oak door. Nikki, Diane called out, stopping her in her tracks. Nikki paused, looking back over her shoulder. Don't underestimate him, Diane warned, her voice stripped of all malice, leaving only genuine, terrifying concern. He will destroy you if he finds out. I know, Nikki replied, her chin held high, the fire of a survivor burning in her eyes. But he underestimated me. Nikki stepped out of the Abbott mansion and into the biting chill of the Genoa City night. The wind whipped at her hair, but she felt a strange burning heat in her chest. Inside, Diane stood by the window watching the Newman matriarch's car disappear down the long, winding driveway into the darkness. They were two women from vastly different worlds, shaped by different traumas, but united by a singular, terrifying reality. They knew with absolute certainty that this unholy alliance, this secret pact forged in the shadows, was the only way to deal with the sheer, unbridled ruthlessness of Victor Newman. The battle lines had been redrawn in the dark, and the war for the soul of their families had just begun.